who was our congressman for many years, who served on as the chair or co-chair of the House Ethics Committee for many years, who served on the National Endowment for Democracy for many years. You bring so much wisdom and experience to us, and we're so grateful to you. So David will offer some comments, his perspective, and then we will open it up for questions. This is an opportunity for all of us. We really want to hold space for folks to be able to express our concerns, our questions, and also to focus on what is our calling as citizens and as people of faith in this critical time. So holding all of that in this space, I'm going to give the microphone to David. Thank you. Oh, and when you come forward to offer a question or comment, please come forward to the microphone so that the whole room can hear you, and also so that the folks who are online will be able to hear you. Thanks so much. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody. This presentation has been approved for young children by Emil Beauvais and Kash Patel. He didn't approve of it. He didn't approve of it, so I wanted, yeah. So I wanted to start off with a ironic comment just to purge myself of the tension of dealing with this very difficult time in our lives. I suffer from the same dismay and outrage these days that I think many of you do. I want to not apologize for, but at least ask your permission to speak as a Democrat, capital D and small d. I can't do this without lapsing into what might be considered occasional partisan comment. But I hope I can temper our distress with a few little glimmers of hope, and which we're all hungry for these days, I think. I'm just back from 3 days at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, where I froze my tush off on Wednesday and Thursday. And it was an interesting experience to be immersed in these times with students and faculty there in the heartland. The first item on our program there, and I was there with a Republican colleague who left Congress many years after I did. She was an evangelical Christian from southwestern Missouri, so we offered to the students and faculty the kind of contrasts that they may have been looking for or not. But after our first session Wednesday night, which was sort of an open community forum, we had some Q&A, and then went down from the stage, and a man came up to me, probably in his late 60s, early 70s, and said, I'm a Republican here in Iowa, and I'm so troubled by what is going on. And said, where are the Republicans in Congress? Where is their backbone? And then said, in particular, Chuck Grassley. Chuck Grassley, who is 90 maybe, not running again, has absolutely nothing to lose. Why aren't those and others standing up, particularly for the Article I branch of the Constitution? Obviously, I embraced him, at least rhetorically. But it is unfortunately symptomatic of the contrary position to that taken by an old friend of mine and colleague, now deceased, Henry Hyde of Illinois. And it may shock some of you to think that Henry Hyde and I were actually friends, but those were the days. We disagreed about 95% of things that came that had any real policy content to them. But Henry Hyde and I were strong believers in the responsibilities and prerogatives of the Article I branch, the Congress. And more about that in a minute. But I happened to stumble on to a session that Henry was holding in the House chamber back maybe in November of '96, I will guess. And Hyde was speaking to some then newly elected members of the House. And it was part of orientation session, which we had and was done back in the day on a bipartisan basis. And Henry was saying, among other things, to these new members of Congress, if there isn't something that brought you here for which you are willing to lose an election, you have no business being here. And that was the spirit of those of us that were privileged to spend a few years in the Congress, in the Article I branch, to live much of our lives in what I still think of as the temple of our representative democracy. But those days seem to have been overcome by the fear among the current Republicans in the Congress. And I've learned, is a fear that is derivative of several different things. Some of them actually are not fearful. They're glad to be there doing the work of this administration. But I think those are a sizable, but still a minority of the Republicans in their conference. There are many, and I hear from friends who are still serving, many who completely disagree with what is going on, but can't raise their voice or their vote consistent with that belief for a couple of different reasons. One, they are fearful for the physical safety of their families. Second, they are fearful for their own reelection and the forces of being primaried at the instance of the president, which gets back to the Henry Hyde comment. Unfortunately, there aren't enough of them that are willing to lose an election in behalf of what I think they actually believe. And that may be the saddest commentary of all. Just a few observations about the way I am trying to think my way through and feel my way through and reconcile my way through these days. Nothing particularly profound, I'm afraid, those of you that thought you would really be here to hear something. But, you know, it is what it is, and then we want to go and have a chance for all of us to weigh in and express your feelings. I want to highlight a difference between the public business of government and the private business of the private sector. I think these things are being grossly merged in the way that Elon Musk is handling the duties that the president has given him. Public business is one which we necessarily want to have constrained by some important values having to do with the way government behaves. Fairness, equal protection, due process, all of those values that make the way we handle each other in government a little different than the wholesale way that a private CEO can cashier half of his employees. I was reminded at this time at Iowa State of sort of the basic civics that I think many of us may have learned in high school. Some of us unfortunately never learned, including, I think, perhaps the president. So fundamental concepts of separation of powers. What is that about? It is recognizing, as the founders did, that none of us can be trusted with power unchecked, and that we need to have contrived a structure of government that will keep us from getting out of line. So we have the Article I branch, the Congress, the Article II branch, the executive, the Article III branch, the courts. Article I, among other things, is responsible for raising and spending money and enacting law. The Article II branch is there to faithfully execute the laws as the Constitution provides and to be commander-in-chief. The Article III branch is to referee the fights between Article I and Article II, among other things, and to decide what's really in line with the Constitution and statutory law. sadly, I think we have seen in these last month of this administration a overriding of those fundamental concepts of the division, the separation of powers, and the balance of powers. So we've had constitutional violations, in my opinion, where enacted appropriations have been overridden by the acts of the administration. We can look at what's happened to the USAID efforts abroad, which are shameful enough in what they're doing to innocent people that have depended on our aid overseas. What's happening down the road here in Boulder with attacks on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and its responsibilities to deal with climate change, among other things. What's happened at the National Institutes of Health, the Internal Revenue Service. All of these things involve a willful disregard for what the Congress has enacted in appropriation and statutory policy. Less dramatic may be the simple statutory violations that we're seeing, in which civil service requirements for the fair treatment of our federal employees have been ignored. The civil service, which was devised back in the progressive era so that we didn't have politics affecting the administration of federal policy. It was a merit service, still is going to be again, I think. But right now, the firing of career employees, some of whom belong to this church, is a real affront to all of us. And you may have noticed there was actually a demonstration with placards and the rest down at the NOAA building in South Boulder on Wednesday, and more of that to come, I think. We have this unimaginable conflict between the notions of efficiency as supposedly advanced by Doge and democracy. Doge is private business run amok in a public sphere. Federal civil servants are charged by law with implementing policy enacted by the Congress and funded by the Congress. Our federal employees are being charged with poor performance when they've been actually evaluated exceptional performance. They have been told they have to comply with some amorphous notion of administration policy in ways that conflict with statutory policy enacted by the Congress. So we are in a bind. In addition to just the statutory violations and the constitutional violations, we're faced, and all of this is muddied, and so I hope at least it helps me to try to separate and segregate some of the offense into different categories. In addition to the constitutional and statutory violations, we have simply bad decisions. However offensive they may be, they are within the discretion of the president. And so we need to fight the fight that is justified by the clear violations and take a deep breath and at least hope for an end to just the bad decision making. So a little bit of a recitation there. I'm still a naive believer in NATO, but the president can mess with NATO. I think Russia started the war, not Ukraine. I actually believe in the sophistication and really breadth of experience of our senior military leadership, especially compared to those that are now running the Pentagon. We have rule of law violations that are, again, I think, sadly, perhaps within the discretion of the president. The pardoning of the January 6 criminals, now basically turned loose by the pardon to work the will of this man against those that disagree with him. For me, and we've got some lawyers here. I know, Ed, there you are. Any other lawyers want to scream at the idea of the Justice Department ordering the dismissal of the charges against Eric Adams in New York. It is breathtaking. The nomination and confirmation of Kash Patel to run the FBI, and I just heard last night on the news the firing of the judge advocates general of the different branches of the service because they were insisting that their service members follow the law of war and not torture and other things that Mr. Hegseth thinks are okay. We've already talked about the firing of some federal employees. Unfortunately, the firing of probationary federal employees is something that can be done. It's tragic. Many of them have already done enough to have obtained security clearances and access to national security information. They're now on the street. Hopefully they are still patriots and concerned about not letting this sensitive information getting into the wrong hands. And then we have tariffs and deportation. We could get too depressed by going on and on and on. And I also want to just acknowledge that the president isn't always wrong. We have real problems with immigration. We need to address those. We could have addressed those had he not intervened last year when we were on the verge of passing a House and Senate measure that would have gone a long way to deal with this. There are things in government that need reforming, but in a deliberate, systematic, and rational way. The deficit is a problem. We can't just ignore that forever either. And China is a threat. So to give the devil, excuse me, we're supposed to love the enemy. To give the devil his due, there are some things that this administration is trying to do that need to be done, hopefully in a different way, in a constitutional way. And we have a looming confrontation that may end up being a constitutional crisis when the courts, as they have already started to do, intervene in behalf of both statutory and constitutional principles. The president has said that he will obey court orders. We will be forgiven if we are somewhat skeptical of that reassurance, but take it to the bank if you can. One of the challenges for us who are active in politics, I think, and are looking for a way to get out of the corner that we're in, is to not just, as I have just done, go on and on about the abstractions of statutory and constitutional violations, but to translate what's going on into the impacts that it has on real people on the ground, our neighbors, our friends, the rest of the country. So just back from Iowa, to talk to people there about what tariffs are going to do to soybean farmers. You got to bring it home. Here in Boulder, what the mindlessness about climate change being a hoax may portend for our friends that work at NOAA, who are doing such important science. We live here at the edge of the National Forest. Firing Forest Service firefighters. I mean, you really wonder where this stuff comes from, even for Trump to be doing it. National Parks, weather forecasting, NIH, these are going to have impacts on the well-being, the welfare, the health care of our fellow citizens here in Boulder. I look back at November and wonder if there were clues that would have helped us Democrats do a better job in the election. Hard to say exactly why we lost. Was it the price of groceries, immigration, the late departure from the race by President Biden, Gaza, the failure of the administration to really make the case for its big achievements, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, lots of things that were really important changes, but they were largely unfelt and unappreciated. The first job of a political party is to win elections. And I think in part my party lost sight of that in the cause of towing particularly righteous attitudes toward our society. We probably share those attitudes, but a lot of the country didn't and doesn't, and we need to be focused on what it takes to win elections, the difference between religion and politics. We are sometimes overcome by our own righteousness in ways that is off-putting to much of the rest of the country. All is not gloom, however, in my opinion. We almost took the House back in November. We're 3 votes away. It's hard for me to say that I really empathize with Mike Johnson trying to manage the business of the House with a 3-vote margin, but it's going to be impossible. He cannot lose 4 votes and still maintain control of the floor, and he is also under stringent advice by the rump part of the Republican conference not to make deals with Democrats. But he's going to have to do that, so stay tuned. The Senate is a little bit gloomier. However, in the midst of all that's gone on the last month, you may have lost track of the fact that John Thune, the current new majority leader, has said the filibuster will be maintained. We hate the filibuster when we have the majority. We love the filibuster when we're now in the minority. So, you know, be careful what you wish for, because it's all going to change. So there is that in the next month or year and a half. I believe things are set up and are going to be even further positioned for the Democrats to win control of the House in 2026. We came very close. The members of the House that are from districts, and there are several that President Biden won last fall, know that they can't get away with this stuff. Their jobs are at risk, and that's another reason that Mike Johnson is going to have a hard time holding this thin majority together. Anyway, I feel pretty confident we will get the House back in 18 months. And in the meantime, what do we do as citizens? Get prepared for the campaign in 2026 if you feel like it. I think that's important to do. In the meantime, we need to support the organizations that are doing, if you will pardon me, the Lord's work in the meantime, whether it's the ACLU, CREW, the Citizens for Reform and Equity in Washington, Remian, a local organization that's dealing with immigration rights, and so on. It feels to me a lot like the days of the Civil Rights Movement, for those of you who are old enough to remember that, and I see enough people nodding. And to do what my classmate elected when I was to the House, the wonderful John Lewis, urged us, which is to get into good trouble. And that may mean taking some risks that we would, in those days, have called civil disobedience. We got to put it on the line because it's that serious. I decided I would invoke the last part, or the first part of the last verse of the hymn we sang this morning. So God grant us for tomorrow ways to order human life that surround each person's sorrow with a calm that conquers strife. So let me hear from you.
David, what do you expect the Supreme Court to decide about impoundment?
Keith has invoked a little-known provision of law called the Impoundment Act, which was adopted back when Nixon was president, and he started sitting on congressionally approved appropriations, and they got angry with that and passed the Impoundment Act, which says, greatly simplified, the president can propose things that he thinks areas of funding that should not be expended, but he has to take that proposal to Congress and they have to approve it, otherwise it can't happen. So it could be no unilateral decision by the executive to not spend money that the Congress has appropriated. I think the Supreme Court will uphold that. It's pretty clear cut. It is, I guess, an infringement on this notion of the unitary executive, but I don't think they're going to buy into that either. So we'll see. Karen.
Thank you, David. Karen Hoover. We're filled with hope from our worship service and from your comments. At the same time, I was really just pummeled this week by Illinois Governor Pritzker's State of the State address. And this was the most forthright, direct speech I have heard. But the part that tore me about, I want to share with people because for me, this is the crux of it. Can we stop this in time? It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And you spoke about the fear for their lives and the safety of the families that representatives feel, and the fact that the Proud Boys, et cetera, have been turned loose. And violence is the mechanism, you know. So do you really think we can stop this in time? I don't think we have 18 months till the next election. I pray that we do. But there has to be a better response than there's been so far.
Well, I do think we can stop it, and at least by the time we need to get to a change in control of one body in the Congress. I'm not much of a historian, but my hunch is that we are more firmly embedded in our traditions and culture of democracy than were the Germans in 1933, where it was still a fairly New Deal for their political system. I think we've got more staying power, but...
They created economic conditions that Trump is
right.
creating now.
But, you know, we got the best economy in the world.
What about health care? My mother had cancer, died in 1988, went to Mexico, Jimmy Carter Jews Medical Center in Tijuana. I had a stroke 14 years ago. I had hernia surgery 3 years ago. I have Connect for Health Colorado. Both of us are just gifted healers. I'm taking advantage of this, but what do you think about health care? What can we do to strive to improve our health and improve health care?
Well, what can we do to improve our health care? I think in the context that we're dealing with right now, we can make sure that your outrage about cuts in the Food and Drug Administration, in the checking on the safety of new drugs, the cutting of budgets for the National Institutes of Health doing research into the diseases that you indicated, that's all live stuff right now. I'm not optimistic that we're going to improve our healthcare system until we get a new political regime in place. Hi, David.
Hi, David. Just a quick aside, our youngest daughter was a U.S. Assistant U.S. Attorney she was trying January 6th defendants. She's no longer employed, obviously. So this is affecting us. But one of the dilemmas I have as a Coloradan living in the Boulder area is it's hard to know what we can do on the congressional side because we've got people who believe, as we believe, basically representing us. I tried, in an association you and I had to, earlier in our lives, one of our colleagues was John Barrasso from Wyoming, and I've been sending John missives, not a reply yet from John, and I thought he was a wonderful guy. I'm no longer convinced of that. He may be a gutless wonder, as opposed to a wonderful guy. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's very frustrating. You want to do something, but the channels we've logically got don't work. The 17 text messages I get a day for money aren't really the answer. And so I'm curious how you think individuals can sort of work our way through this.
Thanks, David. Well, I share that frustration because I know, writing to John Hickenlooper or Michael Bennett or Joe Neguse is, they're already with us, and strongly so. However, just next door in the 8th Congressional District is a newly elected Republican member of the House, and he doesn't know where you live. And just south of Denver is a newly elected member of Congress from Colorado Springs. And over on the west, anyway, we've got neighbors of the other belief system that, that I think are also, especially, I forget the gentleman's name who was just elected in the 8th District, but by a very slim margin. So he knows his goose can be cooked at a very low temperature very quickly. And you can go, and there may be efforts, I don't know, to go and protest outside Gabe's office, I think it is. And as I mentioned, there were protesters with placards down at the NOAA labs Wednesday last week. And that may seem like an empty gesture, but I don't think it is. It was covered in the media. There are going to be more and more, there's going to be more and more coverage of protests. You never know exactly what the results of those may be, but maybe you and I go down and sit down at the entrance to the NOAA labs and get arrested.
Hi, David. I'm Jeff Whitaker. I'm Jeff Whitaker. I'm a longtime NOAA employee. I've worked in the building with your name on it since it opened in 1999. And I struggle with how to counsel my younger colleagues, especially, who love their jobs and believe in what they're doing and believe that it's essential for our country and for protecting lives and property and battling climate change. But they feel under attack every day, and many of them are leaving, or the ones that aren't getting fired are leaving because the stress is just more than they can take, and they have to look out for their families. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on what I can say to those folks to help them, keep the faith.
Well, I believe help is on the way. It's going to be a few months, and the courts are going to take their time to deal with some of these things, but I think they're going to decide the cases in ways that respect and recognize the responsibilities that Congress had in passing laws and in making appropriations. Does it help? I don't know whether any of the people you're talking about are probationary employees. Sadly, I just don't think there's a way to prevent the damage there that is already happening. I am distraught at the attacks on science, whether it's atmospheric science or medical science or geophysical science, or, you name it. We have now elected a person to be president of the United States who does not believe in science and facts. So we need to bolster the institutions that we have to protect us from that ignorance as much as we can, as quickly as we can. Again, I see the courts as the best remedy for the near term, and politics as the next best remedy in November of 2026. That's probably not very reassuring to your colleagues. I was trying to figure out a way to invert the Thomas Paine reference of summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. We need winter soldiers and stormy patriots these days.
It does help to see the people out in front of the building with placards.
Okay. We'll be there again then. I was in Ames, Iowa, or I would have been there. Hi.
Hello, my name is William Jeffries. I am a young man. I've been following politics for the past 10 years, and one thing that I think this, if you don't mind, this might be the $1 million question. Why should anyone have any faith in the Democrats whatsoever at this point?
Well, I understand the sense of disappointment that I suspect informs that kind of question. And I tried to get at that a little bit. I think our problem as a party has been being too preoccupied with being proper and not enough occupied with being successful. So the purpose of the party ought to be not to come up with the most glossy, self-righteous positions that we can come up with that have appeal to relatively narrow interests, but to come up with the most fundamental black and white positions that we can that appeal to people's daily lives. We sort of have lost that mission, and I'm sorry for that. I don't know what's going on with the party nationally. I don't know the new chairman of the party. But I think there's going to be a tremendous interest and effort to recapture a big part of our government come November of 2026. You know, we already have a trifecta, if you will, here in Colorado, the House, the Senate, and the governorship. So it's not as if the party hasn't had some successes locally. I think we are all overwhelmed, however, by what happened in November and the election of this man for president.
Yeah, but this goes further than November. I mean, last election style, the Democratic voters, like the overwhelming majority of the Democratic base, like they told the party, we don't want our tax dollars going to bombs that kill children. We don't want to throw in league with billionaires like Mark Cuban and the lot. We need Medicare for all. Like these are stuff that the party's voters support overwhelmingly, and basically, like at the convention, we were told to shove it, and also, I mean, it was pretty clear, like well before he dropped out, that Biden wasn't doing well, and I believe you signed a letter at one point urging him to drop out before he did, and it's just the people around him. They lied to us. They said things were okay, and when we pointed out like what was obvious, we were told not to believe our own eyes. Like, how can any party like really that has destroyed the social contract with its own voters as much as this party has, can anything be salvaged?
Well, I'm here as a former elected official and a member of this church, and not as a proponent of what the Democratic Party has been in all of its aspects over the last few years. I'm still a Democrat. If we have a choice to make between where Democrats are coming from and where Republicans are taking us, I'd rather still be a Democrat, and am. You're right, there was an opportunity missed. I tried to speak out about it way earlier in the year, last year, when it was pretty clear that Biden shouldn't be our nominee. I'm not sure how much difference it would have made had he gotten out when he should have gotten out. And we had a robust primary process with candidates being vetted and developing policies that I think would have probably spoken to the concerns that you've expressed.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with that. Although as much as you say like what the options are, there are more than just two political parties in this country. So yeah, I just think that basically the argument that it's me or only them, I think maybe it is a little bit it doesn't hold as much weight as I think you're making it sound like it is.
Fair enough.
Thanks.
Hi, Lauren.
Hey, David. Thanks for being here. I'm curious about your sort of perspective on public pressure, even for Democratic representatives. My gut right now is telling me that is a really important thing for us to be doing as citizens, is putting pressure, positive, negative, right, on whoever we can. And just because we might have voted for the people who are in office now or not, right? Like, I still have the sense that even if they agree with us, it's important to speak. And I would like you to either challenge that or affirm it
No,
and
no,
tell
no.
me your perspective.
I don't quarrel with that at all. While I was in office, I liked to hear from people that liked me. That's one reason you run for office with a fragile ego. You see, so no, I should have said something along those lines. I think you're absolutely right. Joe and Michael and John will welcome a reinforcement because it can get pretty lonely where they are right now. So yes, thank you.
Hi, David.
Hi.
I'm Nancy Wade. Thank you for your comments. I watch a lot of news, and it's not always easy, but I'm an old journalism major. I can't help myself. I saw last week something that really gave me hope, and that was there were several town hall meetings with congressional representatives, and people were mad. And these were Republicans in Roswell, Georgia, who were mad, and they're mostly mad at Elon Musk. But I saw a lot of hope in that they recognize what's going on, and they may be able to turn the tide in some way. I mean, do you think that's the beginning of a groundswell?
Well, I was hugely encouraged to see those news reports as well, Georgia, Oregon, some other places, maybe Texas even. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it starts to undermine that willingness of Republican incumbents to sort of cede their conscience to Trump and Musk and not worry about either their self-serving ambition to get reelected again, which unfortunately may be controlling in a lot of cases, notwithstanding Henry Hyde's advice, or just realizing that they're not where they thought their constituents were, and that will really matter to them. So yeah, I think those demonstrations at town meetings are important, especially the coverage that they get and the hope that they bring to those of us that are wondering if anybody's out there doing what they are doing. What may happen now, sadly, is that there will be fewer town meetings.
That's true. Oh, too bad. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Kevin.
Hi, David.
This is the backbone of the bass section up here now.
That's right.
And Phil. There's Phil.
Yeah,
hey.
Yeah. Now, this is maybe not really a question, but I'm just trying to cheer people up. So this is me being a cheerleader. About 26 years ago, those of you who don't know, I suffered a very severe traumatic brain injury and lost a quarter of my brain cells were destroyed. And I went for the next 5 years or 10 years after that, I went through a similar time that feels the same as the country does now, that there's lots of uncertainty about what to do. And what I determined is at that time that I needed to take this opportunity and make some change in my career. Totally switched fields, became a minister, and I had to go to school and all that, but there was support there, and I feel like there's lots of energy towards change, political change now, because there's lots of groups, and I can't remember their names, Indivisible or whatever, all these things. That we should see this time not as a time of depression, but a time of let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Amen. Thank you, Kevin.
Hi there, my name's John Butterfield, and thank you very much for being here. I prefer being pissed to being despairing. I'm disappointed, is probably the mildest way to put it. I'm disappointed I don't see that sort of anger, that sort of righteous indignation from the Democrats. My wife has been using a program called 5 Calls, which I highly recommend for those. It's an app that if you put in, this is where I am, this is where I live, it provides you numbers, 5 people you can call, your representatives, your senators, whatever. She placed a call to our representative and asked, what are you doing about this? And of course, she didn't talk to the representative, she talked to a person, and we did get an email back which said, this was related to the Forest Service. He was very proud to have written a strongly worded letter. Wow. That's better than not writing a letter. But what I am looking for, and have not yet been able to find, is an outlet, which groups we just heard about, some other groups that are arising like this. The Daily Camera uses up half of their local section on Sundays saying, here are all the volunteer opportunities. That's wonderful if you want to be a volunteer. I'm feeling a lack of a centralized source which provides options for people to do something other than be pissed or despair. Is there anybody in your inside knowledge of this, anyone on the Democratic side, or even just the side of, it can be other parties, I don't care, who is assembling or has a clearinghouse which provides this sort of question, the sort of answers for the people like me who have the questions saying, what can I do? It is a little frustrating to live in Boulder where we say, well, what do you do in Boulder? It's people have declared what side they want to be on. But I'm not seeing that, and I'm not seeing that righteous indignation from the Democratic Party. My wife has heard me complain for the last couple of elections to say, you can't win votes from the people, from the working class by calling them deplorables. You can't win votes by looking at the numbers and saying, oh, we got this. You have to win votes by going out and talking to the people that may not necessarily agree with you. And I'm not seeing that sense of indignation from the Democratic Party, and it's incredibly frustrating. I don't know if you have any ideas about who is in charge in the loyal opposition, or even the disloyal opposition. I just want to know who's pushing this. It was great to hear from the governor of Illinois. I would assume that there are others who are doing this, but meanwhile, things are just percolating along undercover, and a letter is not doing the job.
Well, fair enough. Not that this is really responsive. One, I don't know that there is a gathering central clearinghouse for the things that we can and ought to want to do. Kevin mentioned Indivisible, which in my judgment, Indivisible has a lot of energy and a lot of indignation, and I'm not sure where that leads for them other than organizing protests, which are important to try. I'm also, as you can probably tell, in the school of politics that thinks it may be better to be smart than mad. And so I'm looking for those in my party that are being clever and smart and not necessarily expressing their outrage, which I am repressing to some degree myself, and which I think a lot of elected Democrats are. We are hobbled, if you will, by being in the minority, and we get less press attention because of that. So the people that are outraged, that are expressing their outrage, may not become known to you. Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, and Hakeem Jeffries in the House are who they are. They are not the party's leaders. They are the leaders of the Democratic caucuses in their two bodies, and they are circumscribed by that responsibility. So it's tough to know how we have your hoped-for leader of the outrage and the expression of where we should be headed as a party right now. It's also 5 weeks into this horror. So things also take a little time. We should be frustrated, we should be impatient, but I don't think we've seen the last of the kind of leadership coming out of the party that you're hungry for.
I hope you're right.
Hi, I'm Susan. Two things. One is just people are asking about actions. People are asking about actions, and just two things. One idea that I really liked, my daughter's a college student, and I read in the Yale Daily News this week a really nice community action that was like the first super positive thing I'd read. With this immigration thing, they had the idea, they were posting a group of restaurants that you should patronize that immigrants work at, and I was like, that's actually pretty easy to once a week go out to eat somewhere where I think immigrants work and give them a good tip. So I thought that was nice. I wanted to ask you, David, I've been thinking this past week, I'm an optimist, so when all of the Project 2025 stuff happened and we were reading about it, I thought it was overkill, and like it would be a vast exaggeration, and very few of those things would actually happen even after he was elected. And sadly, I was totally wrong. And one thing I've been thinking a lot about is, you know, the Heritage Foundation and all these kind of endemic, like big organizations that plan and strategize, and think tanks. Like, what is our equivalent as Democrats that is like making big plans? And because I just felt even more despair thinking I actually couldn't think of one, and I could think of a bunch of conservative ones.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My bad back is getting to me, so I'm going to.
David, why don't you take a chair?
Yeah, this is all I need. I just didn't want to be disrespectful. We don't have a Heritage Foundation or a American Enterprise Institute, which is much more reasonable and centrist, or the microphone. Sorry, thank you. You know, we have the Brookings Institute, which is ostensibly nonpartisan, and I think lives up to that, but does good policy work. We have the New America Foundation. So there are less well-known and less extreme and less rhetorically inclined organizations that are doing policy work for the Democrat side of things. I don't want them to do a Project 2028.
Why?
Why? Because I think these things, as the Heritage experience shows, I think, become the captive of the extreme edge of the party. And what we need is not something that captures the extreme edge of the Democratic Party, but the center of the country.
Well, I think we need something that's effective.
I agree, and I think that's what would be effective.
And we don't have anything.
And centrism isn't sexy.
I don't care if it's centrist. I just want it to be effective and not this radical.
I agree completely. It just we may have a different sense of what the style is that will be most useful in getting to the objective that we share. Chris, I know you're going to come up and tell us that you're joining the base section again.
You're doing fine. You guys sounded great. No, so when like probably most people here, probably like everybody here, I get emails, dozens of emails every day. If I would just send them money, everything would be better. And I'm not convinced that enough people are swayed by advertisements that money does anything. I mean, what's your sense? I mean, I get emails from people all over the country. It's like, hey, there's this. You talked about the House. Lots of people in House races saying, please help me win. Does it work? You know, does giving money actually change things?
Well, a couple of different responses. One is I mentioned two organizations that in my mind are doing good work, not regarding advertising, but because they're in the trenches in court cases. The ACLU and CREW, Committee for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, I think is what the CREW, C-R-E-W, and Remian, a local organization that's really doing good work, again, largely in providing legal representation to folks facing deportation. If you will stand by a year from May, you will again receive from me and my friend Les Francis a targeted list of 20 House races around the country that will make the difference in who controls the House in the next election. Between now and then, I think giving to candidates, you know, they are using the current times and excesses to raise money. Most members of Congress come from safe districts, which is one of our problems because it means they are responsive to the edges of the Republican Party or the edges of the Democratic Party. And we need, as my comment to the last lady that was up here, we need to be going for the middle. Again, much less exciting going for the middle than responding to the edges. Okay. But anyway, hold on to your money for right now, and except for the ACLU and CREW and yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I am mindful of the time.
Yeah, we've got to run.
David and Laura are headed to a memorial service in Denver, and so we need to end this conversation. But I don't think the conversation is over by any means. It will continue in lots of different forms. So I'm sorry for those of you who are all lined up for questions, but please continue. Take them to all of us.
Laura
Take your
is
questions.
signaling that we can take 2 more questions
Oh,
or
2
comments.
more questions.
So,
Okay.
sorry, Lee.
Here we go. All right. Susan.
Thank you, David, for being with us today. Really appreciate it. And I'll take this down. I have 2 thoughts, and one is what are the most effective things that we can do as individuals and as a large group of people in our church community? And do we need to feel afraid at all that if we do an action, if our letter gets published, for instance, in a national publication, do we need to worry about reprisals ourselves?
Let me take the first part, or the second part first. Sadly to say, yes. I'm afraid we do need to be worried. A Democratic member of Congress got a letter from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Washington, D.C. last week, challenging him for what appeared to be threats in a statement he made to CNN. And at least by implication, holding the possibility of prosecution by the federal government over his head. Not going to happen. You know, the Congress has special speaking privileges under Article 1 of the Constitution. But given this crowd, I don't think we can be sanguine about the risks that may be taken in speaking our minds. I think that's something we need to do.
Hi, David. Appreciate this this forum and you doing that. Let me do 2 things if I could. First, how do we prevent the Ukrainian people from being thrown under the bus? Is it time for us to organize marches in the streets in support? Another question. Appreciate your comments about, where are the Republicans in Congress that know better? But it's not just the members in Congress. What about the Bushes or Mitt Romney and other people like Mickey Edwards that we both know?
Mickey is now a Democrat, by the way.
That's right. He's an independent now, right? Is it time for a push for a new party that would attract those Republicans that know better versus the Republican Party that has changed so?
Such a hard question to think through. Thank you. As far as the first part, I joked with Chris that maybe we should have signs ready here this afternoon, and we'll all go down to the Boulder Mall, whether it's for Ukraine or the Forest Service or climate science, you name it. We could figure out about 85 different signs that we would be willing to carry, I think. And I'm willing to do it, except I got another commitment this afternoon. Maybe next week. As far as another party, I will confess to you that there were many times when I was still in the House that I would go over and talk to my friend Amo Houghton, moderate to liberal Republican from upstate New York, who was very frustrated with his party a lot of the time, as I was with mine, and say, Amo, you think we could get together with another 10 people from your side and 10 people from our side, and we'll all jump off the cliff together in behalf of, pick a name. But a party that believed in liberal social policy, reasonably serious action on federal spending, and an internationalist view of our responsibility as a country, because that's sort of where I am. And we would laugh about that and then, retreat back to our separate sides of the aisle. So it is possible. Nothing is impossible in this country. I think Elon Musk said that. But I think it's really going to be very, very hard for a party that sort of has that appeal to the disenchanted Democrats and Republicans to get together and do something. You know, we have a hard time figuring out how to turn what is our system into a parliamentary system, which is kind of the path you would have to go through to get to the end point that you're suggesting. We have a few independents in the House and the Senate, but they end up being part of one party or the other for all practical purposes. I'm just too old and too accustomed to these two parties to be able to give you much of a response. Thank you. And you know, thank you all. I was especially taken with Chris's sermon today and feeling so inadequate to follow her inspiring words, to have a conversation like this, which is sort of by definition dealing with pragmatic stuff, not so much spiritual stuff. But I think the spiritual has to inform our pragmatic as well. So, onward.
So, yes, thank you, David. I also remember the sermon that you preached about the spirituality of democracy, and I still turn to that. And actually, my son Sam just quoted you in a seminary paper from that sermon. So, thank you. So, dear friends, let's stand for benediction, and then let's sing Happy Birthday to David. Gracious and loving God, give us wisdom. Give us courage for the living of these days. Go with us and guide us step by step. Help us to see the opportunities in front of us, to share your love, your compassion, your strength, your sustenance. We give you thanks for all the ways that you hold us in your love and call us to share it. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.